Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever paused to imagine a world where the Roman Empire never fell? What if, instead of crumbling under the weight of corruption, invasion and decay, the empire evolved, adapting to the challenges of time, weathering the storms of history, and emerging not as a relic of the past, but as the foundation of our present? Consider this. The Roman Empire stretched from the misty highlands of Scotland to the sands of the Sahara, from the Atlantic Ocean to the banks of the Euphrates. It was more than a military machine, it was an idea of law, of citizenship, of infrastructure, language, philosophy, and governance. Roads that bound nations together, aqueducts that brought life to cities, laws that shaped the principles of justice for centuries. Now imagine a world where that idea never died. Imagine a unified Europe and beyond under a common legal system, a shared currency, a multilingual but interconnected society, all stemming from a Roman core that never fractured. Imagine centuries of uninterrupted technological progress built upon the Roman foundation. No dark ages, no collapse of learning, no loss of centralized administration. We might have reached the Industrial Revolution 1,000 years earlier. Space travel could have begun in the Middle Ages. Global communication, human rights, education for all. These might have been ancient achievements, not modern marvels. But history didn't take that path. The empire did fall, piece by piece, slowly then suddenly, and from its ashes rose the patchwork of kingdoms, the Renaissance and Reformations, revolutions and republics. Humanity found its way, but not without struggle and centuries of trial and error. So why does this question still matter? Because it's more than a historical curiosity. It's a mirror that reflects the choices of today. The Roman Empire fell not because of a single event, but because of complacency, inequality, unchecked power, and division. It reminds us that no civilization, no matter how mighty, is immune to collapse. And yet, it also reminds us of what humans are capable of. The roads we can build, the cities we can raise, the laws we can live by. So perhaps the better question is not, what if the Roman Empire never fell? But rather, what great civilization are we building now? And will it endure? The Roman Empire was far more than just a political or military force. It was a living, evolving idea that shaped the world for centuries and continues to influence our lives today in subtle but powerful ways. When we think of Rome, it's easy to focus on the grandeur of its legions, the conquests of Caesar, or the imposing architecture of the Colosseum. Yet the true power of Rome wasn't in its armies or monuments, it was in the systems, the principles, and the philosophies that guided its rule and were embedded deep into its very foundation. It was a civilization driven not only by power, but by purpose and organization, one that offered a sense of order and identity to a vast and diverse population. At its height, Rome governed nearly a quarter of the world's population, spanning continents and cultures. What held it all together wasn't brute force alone, it was a shared sense of belonging to something larger than any individual city or region. The concept of civitas, citizenship, offered a revolutionary idea for its time, that people of different lands and languages could be integrated into a single system under one set of laws and values. Citizenship wasn't merely a status, it was a promise of rights and responsibilities, binding individuals to the state in a reciprocal relationship. Over time, this concept was extended even to those who had once been outsiders or enemies, reflecting a rare and pragmatic inclusiveness. Equally transformative was the Roman legal system. Roman law introduced principles such as the presumption of innocence, equality before the law, and the right to a fair trial. Ideas that would echo through centuries and form the bedrock of modern legal systems around the world. Legal codification, civil procedures, and systems of appeals were not only advanced for their time, but were structured with a vision for continuity. These were not laws passed arbitrarily by tyrants, but codified standards developed by a complex bureaucracy and interpreted by trained jurists. Even after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Roman law was studied and revived in the East and later in medieval Europe through the rediscovery of Justinian's Code. Its survival across time testifies to its intellectual strength and moral resonance. Infrastructure was another pillar of this grand idea. Roman engineering was not only technically brilliant, it was ideologically purposeful. Roads were not just trade routes, they were instruments of integration. They allowed ideas, troops, goods, and culture to move efficiently across vast distances. The saying, "all roads lead to Rome," was more than poetic. It described a deliberate network that physically connected the empire and symbolized unity. Aqueducts brought clean water to millions, supporting urban centers in ways that wouldn't be matched for over 1,000 years. Public baths, forums, and amphitheaters served both practical and social functions, creating communal spaces that reflected a civic culture of shared life. Latin, the language of Rome, functioned as both a tool of administration and a medium of cultural cohesion. Through Latin, a diverse array of peoples could engage with the same texts, understand the same laws, and participate in the same dialogues of politics, philosophy, and faith. Even long after the Western Empire collapsed, Latin endured as the language of learning, law, and religion across Europe. It shaped the Romance languages and influenced countless others, embedding Roman concepts deeply into the fabric of communication and identity. Education, too, played a role in sustaining the Roman idea. The Roman model of education placed a high value on rhetoric, logic, and civic responsibility. A well-educated citizen was not just literate, but trained to participate in public life, whether in the forum or the courts. This emphasis on critical thinking and public discourse fostered a culture in which governance was not a mystery reserved for elites, but a process in which free citizens were expected to play an active part. Even in religion, the Roman approach was methodical and syncretic. The empire's pantheon, adapted to include gods from conquered peoples, and religious tolerance, so long as loyalty to the emperor was maintained, was practiced for much of its history. This blending of spiritual traditions reflected Rome's broader tendency to absorb rather than obliterate, to assimilate rather than exclude. And when Christianity spread across the empire, it did so along Roman roads, in Roman towns, through Roman institutions, eventually becoming the empire's official religion and reshaping its moral vision from within. In every aspect of life, from governance to architecture, from philosophy to plumbing, the Roman Empire embodied the power of an organized idea. It offered a vision of how diverse peoples could live together under a common framework. This vision, rooted in structure, law, and shared purpose, transcended geography and time. Imagining a world in which the Roman Empire never fell opens the door to a radically different trajectory of human civilization, one where technological, cultural, and intellectual progress might have accelerated far beyond what we know today. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire marked the beginning of a long period in Europe commonly referred to as the Dark Ages, during which centralized administration crumbled, literacy rates declined, and scientific development slowed. Without this interruption, the timeline of progress might have leapt forward by centuries, altering everything from the invention of modern democracy to the advent of space exploration. The Roman Empire, at its height, possessed not only administrative genius, but also a remarkable aptitude for adapting and integrating knowledge. They absorbed Greek mathematics, Egyptian engineering, and Babylonian astronomy. Roman cities were marvels of organization, with paved roads, running water, indoor plumbing, and public institutions like libraries and bathhouses. This foundation of civil infrastructure was the bedrock upon which further innovation could have flourished. The empire already demonstrated an understanding of large-scale engineering, urban planning, and governance that was unrivaled for centuries after its fall. Had the empire remained intact and continued to evolve, This infrastructure could have become a springboard for breakthroughs in science and technology. For instance, the Romans possessed the knowledge of steam power in a rudimentary form. The aeolipile, an early steam turbine invented in the 1st century CE, was viewed more as a curiosity than a practical tool. If intellectual and technological curiosity had been nurtured without interruption, this discovery might have been developed into usable machinery, potentially sparking an industrial revolution 1,000 years before it actually occurred. With continuous support for scholars, engineers and inventors under a stable imperial system, innovations in mechanics, medicine, agriculture and navigation could have occurred in ancient times. The transmission of knowledge would have followed a more consistent and expansive path as well. With literacy valued and supported by institutions, education systems rooted in Roman models might have reached wider segments of the population earlier. Universities could have formed much earlier in history, spreading not only classical thought, but also fostering new scientific inquiry. Philosophers and scientists, building on Roman and Greek foundations, could have collaborated across the empire's vast territories, aided by a common language and a unified bureaucratic system. Such a stable and educated society would have had the organizational capacity to pursue large-scale explorations beyond its borders. Long-distance trade, already robust under Rome, could have evolved into early global commerce. Sea travel, which the Romans already employed effectively, might have expanded across the Atlantic or deeper into the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Contact with other great civilizations such as those in China, India, or even the Americas might have occurred under more organized and peaceful circumstances, leading to the earlier exchange of ideas, crops, technologies, and cultures on a global scale. Politically, the survival of the empire could have meant the preservation of a legal and administrative framework that minimized the constant warfare that plagued post-Roman Europe. Instead of fragmented feudal territories, there might have been a sustained central authority capable of mediating disputes and managing resources more effectively. This stability could have fostered a political environment that encouraged innovation, free trade, and cultural flowering. Imagine the Renaissance beginning in the 7th or 8th century instead of the 14th, a rebirth of art, science, and humanism centuries ahead of schedule. In matters of religion, the continuity of the Roman Empire could have offered a different path as well. As Christianity became the official faith of the empire, it began to merge Roman administrative structure with religious authority. A unified empire might have allowed for a more harmonious integration of science and faith, avoiding some of the conflicts that later arose between church and reason during the Middle Ages. The central government, influenced by both Roman rationalism and Christian morality, could have funded hospitals, universities, and scientific institutions, encouraging spiritual and intellectual growth hand in hand. The social consequences of a continuous Roman civilization are equally significant. The idea of citizenship, with its associated rights and responsibilities, might have developed into a more inclusive and structured concept of human rights. Slavery, though prevalent in Rome, was already being philosophically challenged by some thinkers. Given time and reform, this institution might have been abolished far earlier than in our actual timeline. Women's roles too might have evolved differently under a system that prized order, education, and civic duty. All these possibilities rest on the premise that the empire would not remain static, but would continue to adapt, reform, and integrate new knowledge and populations. Rome had shown that it could absorb and elevate diverse cultures, from North Africa to Gaul to the Middle East. A world where that process never ended is a world that might have experienced a golden age of civilization not once, but continuously reshaping the course of human history. The fall of the Roman Empire was not a single catastrophic event, but a slow and complex unraveling that took centuries to fully play out. It was a process shaped not only by external pressures, but, more profoundly, by internal weaknesses that hollowed out the very core of the empire. Understanding the reasons behind this gradual collapse reveals more than just a story of the past. It offers timeless lessons about the fragility of even the most powerful systems and the critical importance of adaptability, unity, and integrity in sustaining a civilization. One of the most critical factors in the fall of the Roman Empire was complacency. As the empire expanded and its borders stretched across vast territories, the sense of urgency and vigilance that had once fueled its rise began to diminish. Military victories and material wealth brought a degree of comfort and overconfidence that dulled Rome's strategic edge. Its systems that had been carefully constructed, its armies, bureaucracy, infrastructure, began to suffer from neglect. Instead of adapting to new realities, many Roman leaders clung to outdated practices and resisted necessary reforms. The empire's ability to respond flexibly to crises diminished, leaving it vulnerable to both internal decay and external threats. Another deep-seated problem was inequality. The Roman social structure became increasingly rigid over time, with a widening gap between the wealthy elite and the struggling masses. Land was concentrated in the hands of a few, while small farmers and urban laborers bore the brunt of economic hardship. Heavy taxation, often unfairly enforced, placed unbearable pressure on the lower classes, leading to unrest and disillusionment. This growing inequality eroded the sense of shared identity and mutual responsibility that had once bound Roman society together. When people feel excluded from the benefits of the system, they lose the incentive to defend it. The social contract, once rooted in the idea of citizenship and public service, weakened until it became almost meaningless for many. Political instability further accelerated Rome's decline. The empire saw a rapid turnover of emperors, many of whom rose to power through violence or manipulation rather than legitimate succession. Civil wars became frequent as rival generals and factions competed for control, often at the expense of the common good. The Praetorian Guard, once a protector of order, became a kingmaker, auctioning off the throne to the highest bidder. This atmosphere of chaos made it difficult for long-term planning or meaningful reform to take place. Corruption spread through every level of government, with officials more concerned about personal gain than public service. The central authority that had once projected stability now became a source of uncertainty and fear. The military, once Rome's greatest asset, also became a liability in the later years of the empire. As recruitment from Roman citizens declined, the army increasingly relied on foreign mercenaries and conscripts who had little loyalty to the empire itself. While many of these individuals fought bravely, the overall cohesion and discipline of the Roman military suffered. In some cases, these foreign troops turned against the empire, contributing directly to its downfall. The defense of the vast Roman borders became unsustainable, particularly as funding and manpower dwindled. Barbarian groups, such as the Visigoths and Vandals, once kept at bay by the disciplined legions, found weakened defenses and seized their opportunity to invade. Economic decline compounded these issues. The empire struggled with inflation, devaluation of currency, and trade disruption. Agricultural production suffered due to overworked land, poor management, and frequent invasions. Urban centers began to shrink as people fled to the countryside in search of safety and sustenance. The once vibrant Roman economy became stagnant, undermining the tax base and weakening the state's ability to support public services, the military, and infrastructure. Without a strong economy, even the best institutions began to crumble. Cultural fragmentation also played a role. As local identities reasserted themselves and communication across regions became more difficult, the sense of Roman unity dissolved. The Latin language began to diverge into regional dialects. Local customs and loyalties replaced imperial identity in the hearts of many. Religion too became a dividing force during certain periods, as doctrinal disputes and power struggles within the church influenced politics and policy. These cultural divisions weakened the shared sense of purpose that once held the empire together. Ultimately, the Roman Empire did not fall because of one invading army or one disastrous decision. It fell because its internal structures eroded slowly under the weight of complacency, inequality, corruption, and division. The lessons are clear and enduring. No matter how powerful a system may appear, it is only as strong as its capacity to reform itself, to remain fair to its people, to hold its leaders accountable, and to foster a shared vision for the future. Asking, what if the Roman Empire never fell, is more than just a historical curiosity. It's a mirror we hold up to our own time. The question is not simply about imagining alternative timelines or fantasizing about a world with advanced aqueducts and paved roads in every village. It is a deeper provocation, one that forces us to confront the very nature of our progress, our systems, and our responsibilities as stewards of civilization. The idea that such a powerful and intelligent empire could dissolve into chaos and fragmentation reminds us that no society, however mighty, is immune to decline. Reflecting on this history challenges us to evaluate the paths we are currently on, to consider whether we are learning from the past or doomed to repeat its patterns. The Roman Empire represented an apex of human coordination. Logistically, legally, and philosophically, it was a system that managed to unite diverse peoples under a shared identity and organize complex societies through governance, infrastructure, and law. That such a system could collapse, not overnight, but slowly and visibly, should send a powerful message to us today. The fall of Rome didn't happen because of a single war or leader. It occurred because people stopped believing in and maintaining the very principles that had once made their civilization strong. Complacency replaced vigilance. Division undermined unity. This lesson resonates in modern times with chilling clarity. We live in a world of unprecedented technological advancement and interconnectedness. Global institutions, democratic frameworks, and economic systems now shape our lives in ways ancient Romans could never have imagined. But are we preserving the foundations of those systems, or eroding them through neglect and short-sightedness? Are we investing in education, civic engagement, and equitable development, or are we allowing inequality and disinformation to divide and weaken us? The fate of Rome invites us to look beyond the superficial markers of success and assess whether we are cultivating the kind of resilience that enduring civilizations require. The Roman Empire, even in its decline, still had moments of brilliance, reforms, and revival. It wasn't incapable of change, but it struggled to change fast enough. In that way, Rome is not a cautionary tale about hubris alone. It is also a lesson in the dangers of institutional inertia. Systems that resist reform, even when the signs of breakdown are clear, ultimately collapse under the weight of their own rigidity. In our era, where climate change, geopolitical tension, and technological disruption pose complex and interconnected threats, flexibility and foresight are not luxuries, they are necessities. The Roman experience shows what happens when a civilization fails to adapt, not because it lacked knowledge, but because it lacked the collective will to act. The what-if question, then, is not only about roads not taken, it's about roads still available. If Rome had endured, we imagine a world with greater continuity in education, legal systems, and scientific discovery. But that vision of a better world doesn't have to remain in the realm of fantasy. It serves as a challenge to build institutions that last, not because they are inflexible, but because they are wise and responsive. To cultivate societies that value shared identity, not in exclusionary terms, but in a way that bridges diversity with unity. To empower citizens to contribute to the public good, not just consume private rewards. There is also a moral dimension to this reflection. The Romans were not perfect. Their empire was built on conquest, slavery, and hierarchy. But within that flawed structure were seeds of ideas that would inspire generations: citizenship, justice, infrastructure, and the rule of law. The tragedy is not just that the empire fell, but that it took so long for those ideas to re-emerge and spread again. If the Roman Empire had transitioned into a more just and equitable form without collapsing, how many wars, famines, and regressions might have been avoided? How many lives could have been lived in peace and prosperity instead of conflict and chaos? It forces us to ask, are we repeating this mistake now by allowing opportunity to slip through our fingers? In a sense, the Roman Empire never truly disappeared. Its legacy lives in our languages, our laws, our architecture, and even our political institutions. But legacy alone is not enough. The question, what if the Roman Empire never fell, is ultimately a question about potential, what we can still achieve, what we must protect, and how we choose to face the future. Every generation inherits both the accomplishments and the unfinished tasks of those who came before. Whether we advance or regress depends on our willingness to learn, to imagine boldly, and to act decisively in shaping the world we want to leave behind. The rise and fall of the Roman Empire is a powerful reminder that the fate of civilizations is not solely determined by external forces, but by the choices made within. The empire, at its peak, was the epitome of human achievement. Its roads connected vast territories, its laws shaped societies, and its military ensured peace across a sprawling world. Yet, as its internal divisions deepened, its external threats mounted, and its leaders failed to adapt, Rome's decline became inevitable. This collapse, however, was not the end of its influence. The empire's eventual disintegration provided crucial lessons about the nature of human societies and how their legacies depend on the decisions made by those who inherit them. It highlights an essential truth: legacy and collapse are not predetermined, but are shaped by the actions of the present generation. Rome's internal decay did not happen overnight. It was a slow erosion of the very values that had once made it strong. The empire's system of governance, which had functioned so effectively at its height, became increasingly corrupt and inefficient. Political power became concentrated in the hands of the elite, and the people, the very foundation of Roman citizenship, grew distant from the workings of the empire. This disconnect between the rulers and the ruled was a critical factor in the empire's eventual downfall. As social divisions deepened and economic inequality widened, the empire became less cohesive, and its citizens less invested in its success. The growing sense of alienation led to a weakened sense of duty to the state, and without this commitment, the empire was unable to withstand the pressures from both within and outside its borders. The military, once the backbone of Roman power, also began to falter. The quality and loyalty of Roman soldiers declined as the empire relied more and more on mercenaries, soldiers from outside the empire who had no personal allegiance to the state. These mercenaries were often more loyal to their paymasters than to Rome itself. As a result, the cohesion and discipline that had once defined the Roman legions gradually dissipated. When external invaders, such as the Visigoths, Vandals, and Huns, launched attacks on Roman territory, the empire's defense system, once unparalleled, was no longer capable of responding with the same effectiveness. The result was not just military defeats, but a loss of faith in the empire's ability to protect its people, further accelerating the empire's collapse. The fragility of Rome's political institutions was another key factor in its downfall. The frequent turnover of emperors, coupled with power struggles, made it difficult for the empire to maintain stability and respond to crises effectively. Many emperors were weak or corrupt, more concerned with their personal power than with the well-being of the empire. The Praetorian Guard, initially established to protect the emperor, became a powerful political force, influencing who would ascend to the throne through bribery and manipulation. This created a system of leadership that was unstable and often ineffectual. The inability to establish a clear, consistent succession of leadership undermined the trust of the Roman people in their rulers, contributing to the broader collapse of political cohesion. Despite the reasons for Rome's fall, the lessons learned from this grand civilization continue to resonate. The fall of the Roman Empire demonstrates that all great societies are vulnerable to collapse, but that collapse is rarely a result of singular events. It is the cumulative effect of repeated choices and missed opportunities, choices made by both leaders and citizens. In this way, the fall of Rome serves as a mirror for the challenges faced by every society that follows. It reminds us that the foundations of a civilization, be it its laws, its economy, its military, or its sense of unity, must be nurtured and maintained. Complacency, corruption, and inequality are the silent killers of civilizations, creeping in unnoticed until they undermine the very institutions that hold society together. The collapse of Rome also teaches us about the nature of legacy. Though the empire may have fallen, its influence did not disappear. The ideas and structures it put in place continued to shape the world long after its demise. The legal systems that were created in Rome became the basis for modern legal practices in many parts of the world. The Latin language, which had been the language of the empire, evolved into the Romance languages, spoken by millions today. The concept of citizenship, the idea of a republic, and the principles of justice and governance. These were not destroyed by the collapse of the empire. Instead, they were inherited by the generations that followed, carried forward by those who understood their importance. In this way, the Roman legacy endured, even as the empire itself fell apart. What remains for us then is not only a study of the past, but a call to action in the present. Just as Rome's internal divisions and failures to adapt led to its collapse, so too can our own systems, if they are not reformed, balanced, and made responsive to the needs of all citizens. The fall of Rome was not inevitable. It was a series of choices made, over time, by those in power and those who allowed that power to go unchecked. If we wish to avoid a similar fate, we must be vigilant. Our actions today, the policies we adopt, the leaders we elect, the institutions we build, will define the legacy we leave for future generations. The collapse of Rome is not a prophecy. It is a reminder that the fate of civilizations is in our hands, and the choices we make now will determine whether our legacies will be one of resilience or ruin. If the Roman Empire had never fallen, the course of human history would have been radically different. A continuous Roman civilization could have provided centuries more of stability, innovation, and centralized governance across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Technological advancement might have accelerated without the setbacks of the Dark Ages. Roman engineering, medicine, and education evolving in a continuous arc. Roads and aqueducts would have expanded further, facilitating trade and communication across a united continent. Culturally, a unified Latin-based language system may have reduced linguistic fragmentation, strengthening global connectivity earlier in history. The legal and political principles of Roman governance could have developed into more structured and widespread democratic systems, supported by a stronger civic identity among its diverse population. The Renaissance, fueled by rediscovery of classical knowledge, may have occurred centuries earlier, advancing science, art, and exploration at a much faster pace. Religiously, the empire might have played a mediating role between emerging faiths, potentially reducing centuries of religious conflict. Economically, a continuous Roman economy would have sustained large-scale infrastructure and commerce, possibly leading to an earlier industrial revolution under a unified economic system. Most importantly, the idea of a common identity Roman citizenship transcending tribal, regional, or ethnic divides could have laid a foundation for a truly global civilization. Though not without flaws, a Rome that evolved instead of collapsing might have spared humanity centuries of war, fragmentation, and regression, and paved the way for a more advanced, interconnected world much earlier in history.